stainless steel DeLorean.
In the late 1970s and early 80s, the DeLorean DMC-12 became the most talked about automobile in the world. It would briefly bring glamour to the city of Belfast, which at the time was being torn apart by a seemingly never-ending cycle of violence. But the project would soon collapse into a shambles of incompetence, deceit, and fraud. John DeLorean, the man behind the fiasco, could charitably be described as an irresponsible and egotistical dreamer. Most people described him as a crook. DeLorean was originally a car designer of some renown. His most famous creation was the Pontiac GTO, considered a generational car in the 1960s. It was said that success went to DeLorean's head, that he became arrogant and lazy, and was more interested in high living than producing great cars. It was also alleged that he stole other people's inventions and passed them off as his own. According to DeLorean, he had resigned from General Motors to follow his dream of making, quote, ethical cars. In truth, General Motors fired him. Fast forward to August 1978 and a packed press conference in Belfast, Northern Ireland. DeLorean sat with the British government's Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Roy Mason, to announce a deal had been signed to produce the so-called Dream Car in Civil War-torn Belfast. The government were desperate for prosperity to counter violence, and DeLorean knew it. The glitzy American bragged about how the whole world had competed to host his car plant. Parts of it were true, but some governments had done due diligence on his plans and concluded that they were a recipe for disaster. The British had stumped up an initial £54 million, with another $10 million on hand, together with a host of tax and grant sweeteners. 2 years later, a gleaming new factory had been built in one of Belfast's most deprived and contentious areas that would eventually employ 2,000 people. Yet the carefully constructed myths around the man and his car had already begun to fall apart.
There's lots more to come in this video, but please consider liking, subscribing to the channel, and sharing. And please consider supporting my work with a PayPal donation. The link is in the description. Thank you.
The original car design had indeed been revolutionary, and that was what had sold the British government on it. But the car that went into production was quite different. The differences were camouflaged by media bluff and bluster. Tales of 30,000 pre-orders for the car were just that. Initial reviews from the motoring media were at best lukewarm. The car was considered underpowered for its class. Components were standard. The gull-wing doors and aluminium structure were captivating, but it was all style over substance. Rumours abounded of shoddy construction. DeLorean blamed the US recession for poor sales. However, the Corvette, which the DeLorean was supposed to blow out of the water, was selling like hotcakes at the time. As the cars piled up in dealerships and docksides, so did the financial losses. Of the 8,900 cars produced, fewer than half sold. Margaret Thatcher and the Conservatives had replaced the Labour government in 1979. She despised DeLorean and his project, but had inherited a £64 million fait accompli. The IRA prisoners' hunger strike of 1981 had turned Northern Ireland into a tinderbox. Pulling the plug on DeLorean was seen as putting a match to the tinder. DeLorean had Thatcher over a barrel and gleefully extracted another £20 million that everyone knew was going to a company that was doomed. The factory went into receivership in February 1982. Then in October 1982, the British government seized the factory and placed it into liquidation, following a bombshell no one saw coming. DeLorean had been arrested in a Los Angeles airport hotel and charged by the FBI with taking part in a plot to smuggle 100 kilograms of cocaine. The drugs had a street value of $50 million. U.S. Justice Department officials claimed that DeLorean was making a last-minute effort to raise the money needed to save his bankrupt car company in Northern Ireland. DeLorean would later be acquitted of the charges, probably rightly so, since rules against entrapment appeared to have been violated. But if nothing else, it gave an insight into his character, or lack of it. Further insights came when the government attempted to unravel the liquidated factory. DeLorean had contracted Colin Chapman, of Lotus fame, to finish the design and engineering in 2 years. Most car makers set aside 6. When Chapman balked, DeLorean bribed him, offering to split the £16.5 million of private investors' money between the two of them. DeLorean channeled his half through offshore accounts. Chapman died before he could be called to account for what happened to his half. Taxpayers' money was also swindled in the same web of complex transfers that would eventually end up in DeLorean's private interests. On September the 21st, 1985, DeLorean was indicted on charges that he defrauded investors and committed tax evasion by diverting millions of dollars raised for the company to himself. He was acquitted of all charges. Jurors had apparently misunderstood the judge's instructions and failed to declare a hung jury. DeLorean, by now claiming to be a born-again Christian, played the role of the persecuted saint as he walked free. He spent the rest of his life in relative anonymity and luxury, never suffering any legal or financial penalty for his wrongdoings. It seems clear that if you embarrass the right people thoroughly enough, they will be prepared to make just about anything go away. His legacy in the US seems unencumbered by memories of his wrongdoing. The same can't be said in the UK. As for the car, it still retains a dedicated following, boosted by the Back to the Future movies and other occasional Hollywood appearances. A wealth of spare parts were originally available, although these are dwindling over time. Still admired for its audacious design, it will always be an enduring curiosity. It is perhaps unfortunate that it will also always bear the name of the corrupt and shady character who brought it to life.
The DeLorean. Live the dream today.